Hi, I'm Aruna.
And I'm Shankar.
We're desperate parents. We have a high schooler at home who doesn't know what career choice he should make. And like all teenagers, he communicates only in grunts and shrugs. So we decided we'll have to do the talking. In this podcast series, we'll interview experts from various fields and ask them questions that takes you into their life, gives you a sense of what their work is really like and how their field is developing.
So, one week we could be speaking with someone who teaches aerospace engineering, the next week with a practicing lawyer, and the third with the head of a research lab. And we plan to go beyond these conventional career choices. For example, who wouldn't want to hear the life story of the chef at a five-star restaurant, how he got where he got, for example?
And along the way, we'll also share a nugget or two about decision making, maybe a tool or a mental model that helps while making any choice. We hope this will be useful.
Okay, so our guest on today's show is Anisha Sharma, an associate professor of economics at Ashoka University in Sonipat in India. She's a development economist with research interest in labor economics, the economics of health and education, and public policy, with an interest in gender gaps across these dimensions. She's a co-lead of the Employment and Labor Vertical of the ISEC Center for Public Policy, also an invited researcher at JPAL, the Poverty Action Lab. Anisha received a PhD in economics, an MSc in economics for development, and an MSc in financial economics from the University of Oxford, where she was a Rhodes Scholar. She holds a BA in economics from St. Stephen's College, Delhi University. Welcome to the show, Anisha.
Thank you so much for having me on. Great to be here.
Anisha, I'd like to start with a kind of a macro question. So, obviously, the field of economics has been evolving over several years. What are the hottest areas in economics today?
That's a really interesting question. I think obviously there's one kind of branch of economics that's becoming that's moving very fast, which is econometrics, machine learning, advanced data analysis tools. I think just because of the kind of data that's now available and the kind of tools we have to get the data to speak to us. I think that's one area that's obviously very fast moving. Other areas include, industrial organization, IO, the study of firms, the study of markets. Again, this has actually been aided by the availability of large-scale admin data sets, which weren't available earlier and now have become more widely available. Trade is a very, very old subfield, but as we can see around us, continues to be an exciting and challenging field. And of course, environmental economics is again a new and important subfield for many students today who care so much about the future of our planet. I think in addition to that, some fields remain evergreen. If you think about a country like India, development economics continues to maintain its relevance, multiple areas of public policy, including labor economics. These are new subfields, but they're very important because, the key public policy questions we're asking today are relating to these areas. So, yeah, I would say that these are kind of exciting areas to work in if you want to do economics today.
Super. So I have a brass tacks question related to what we just asked. So the question that any student would have in mind when they study economics is what sectors, what industries can they get into as a profession?
I think, honestly, students who study economics really aren't constrained at all in terms of where they want to go. As a matter of course, most students who study economics want to work in, for example, consulting or finance, and there's a kind of a very natural progression from these degrees to those careers. But I don't think it's not necessary to have an economics degree to do well there, and you don't have to do that either if you study economics. I think a lot of students are interested in public policy today, so they want to work for government or for think tanks or for research organizations or in professional development, more broadly speaking. So that's not quite in government, but looking to support, social outcomes. And of course, research is an area of interest. So there will be people who will want to do a PhD and maybe either enter academia or maybe just work as a researcher in the private sector. So broadly speaking, those are the three main lines that people go into. But I would say they're not that many constraints to students who've got an economics degree. Yeah.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Economics itself has a lot of opportunity, as you just pointed out. But like many other subjects, economics is also becoming interdisciplinary. How does one prepare for that? And can you tell us a little bit more about this?
So I would say the one, when I think of interdisciplinarity, I always think about my big regret, which is that when I studied economics, I never learned any, as an undergrad, I never learned any coding. I was a computer science student. I didn't know how to code. I didn't learn any programming languages, nothing. And then as I went into graduate school, I suddenly got hit by this very steep learning curve that I had to climb up on. And so for me, actually, interdisciplinarity means these are such vital tools to have. Actually, they've now become core to the discipline of economics, the ability to work with data and to speak that kind of language, to be able to write good code across multiple kinds of software, that's pretty key. I think the other way that interdisciplinarity has always been important and continues to be is that, we are ultimately a social science. I know many of us would like to think of ourselves as scientists and STEM and so on, but look, we are a social science. And so many of the topics we study, relate to political economy, relate to, sociology, relate to psychology and management science. And so I think depending on what you're working on, I think it always helps to kind of have an open mind to what these other disciplines have already been saying for so many years. Public health is another example, as we found out during the pandemic. And so I think just being aware of what other disciplines are publishing in the area that you're working in is great. Yeah, useful.
So, in fact, you touched upon something which I wanted to ask a little later, which is you said that economics is a social science, and the way we've understood it, it's a mix of both quantitative skills as a social science. So, what kinds of attributes do students need uh, to be a good economist, or to study economics and pursue any related fields?
I'd say that, look, I mean, to be good at economics, honestly, the attributes that I list are the same attributes you need to be good at anything else, to be a good philosophy major, to be a good journalist, or to be anything, the ability to think analytically, the ability to problem solve, the ability to, read widely, but be able to kind of get to the nub of key issues quickly. All of this is important. But for high school students, I will also add that you've got to at least not be scared of numbers, right? You need to be, I think, happy to study math. I think at the undergraduate level, there isn't actually that much mathematics that we do. It's only really high school mathematics and a little bit, kind of just the specific applications within high school mathematics that we do on the undergraduate program. But unfortunately, lots of kids are just terrified of math, right? And they see it and then they kind of panic and they don't want to go any further. I think it's important to not have that because that will be I think, a major stumbling block for students going ahead. So I think a familiarity with math, with language of numbers, not even beyond a very serious level. Of course, graduate school is a different story. You do a lot more quantitative work there. And the willingness to work with data, to do statistics, I think those are non-negotiable. But everything else, I would say, similar attributes to what you need to do well anywhere in any field.
So, it's the willingness to work with data as well as understand human behavior is probably something that they will need.
Sure. I mean, like I said, you want to study, you want to do well in any subfield. It's kind of, useful to understand human behavior. If you want to work in the media, you should understand human behavior too, right? So I think that is that I think is kind of universal. Well, maybe that's just my view, but I would say the one thing that's non-negotiable here is the quantitative part. Yeah, the math part.
You mentioned public policy in the answer to the first question about the hottest areas, among the hottest areas of study. And I notice you've been heavily focused on public policy yourself. The two fields, of course, are related, but not all students of economics study public policy. I'm trying to understand what kind of mindset one should approach public policy with. And in a large country like India, where change is difficult to bring about, what is a sort of realistic expectation for students of public policy once they get in there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, some things in public policy can move incredibly fast. And I think if you look at, for example, how much policymakers now use data to inform decision making, at least in some areas, that's a set of kind of outcomes which you wouldn't have thought possible 20 years ago. And it's really transformed some aspects of decision making. So some areas do move fast. And so I think students are imaginative and creative. You never know what kind of solution will catch and completely revolutionize the system, at least the way things are done. Think of digitization, for example, or moving kind of access to welfare being moved entirely online. There are problems with that, of course, but it's certainly changed how government interacts with people, right? So these are things that have happened in a very short span of time. So I think it is possible to have a great idea that can be implemented at scale rapidly. But as you say, you have to be realistic, and some elements of political economy are so hard to change. They've been the same way for decades, if not longer. And so I think being realistic about how do you get policymakers, bureaucrats, politicians to change their mind, to be receptive to new ideas and not just be constrained by incentives within the system. I think these are the things that move slowly. I say this as a researcher and not as an actual person who's worked in public policy. I worked very briefly in public policy. I worked for the South African government for a couple of years, a long time ago. But this is just kind of my sense from the outside of what looks hard and what looks possible.
Super, thank you.
How would you distinguish the attributes required for finance vis-a-vis economics? You talked about willingness to work with data. The quant skills are probably even more critical for finance.
I'm not sure that's true. I guess it depends on what you do, right? And there's some parts of economics that are much more quant than some parts of practical finance, right? Because ultimately in finance, if you're working in finance, you're not supposed to study in finance. Depending on the kind of role you have, you may actually not be working too much with data at all, right? Or not that much with data. And there's some roles in finance that are very intensive in terms of quantitative modeling and so on. So I would say, students should follow their preferences. So rather than kind of figure out if their personality suits it, they should really think about what kinds of jobs they see themselves in, what kinds of classrooms they see themselves in, what electives they want to do, what subjects would they like to study. And in the end, ultimately to do well, I think at either is this kind of common set of attributes that we just talked about. And so I think that's true here too. Students should do what they want to study. That's key. You can be very quantitatively minded person, but really love development, and that's fine as well. You can put your quant skills to great use there. So study what you want.
So
what
what drew
excites you
to economics?
Oh, I keep telling students to, listen to themselves and follow what interests them. I just kind of stumbled into economics because, I had high grades in high school and the highest cutoffs were for econ. I enjoyed it in high school, but it really wasn't anything. Whatever they taught us in class 11 and 12 was nothing like what you encounter in undergrad, which in turn is not much like what you encounter in graduate school. So I think each step of the way, you're continually surprised by what you find. So yeah, I don't think I did it for some amazing reasons, but I've been lucky that I've enjoyed it. And I think at least at Ashoka, one thing that we offer students is the chance to change their mind. And so if you join Ashoka and then you say, oh yeah, I'm going to study economics, and you realize, wow, I really don't like this, you do have an opportunity to backtrack and do something else, which, for many other universities, you don't have that choice.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm going to go back to a macro question. I guess in recent times, the study of economics has been like the study of capitalism. And somewhere, for at least non-economists, it's kind of become something like exploiting resources, profit maximization. These are the kinds of things you associate with the capitalism. For students getting into economics now, do you think that's going to continue to remain what they study, or do you think something like the whole sustainability game is going to change the way we look at economics?
So allow me to mount a defense of economics here. I don't think economics is the study of capitalism, right? I think economics is the study of human behavior in as much as it relates to how we make economic decisions for ourselves. How do we allocate scarce resources across almost unlimited needs? How do individual preferences get aggregated up at the level of the system and so on? It just so happens that the economic system we've been living in for the past so many decades has been capitalist in nature. That's just been the kind of political system that we have. And so everything that we study in economics relates to that system. Even China is basically a kind of a state-run capitalist model, right? And so even if you study China, you're essentially studying kind of economic decision making within a system that looks quite capitalist in nature. So I don't think we necessarily set out to define or only study capitalism, but it just happens to be the kind of environment in which decision making has happened for the past so many decades.
Yeah.
Um, of course, sustainability is important now. We care about it. Younger people care about it even more. Obviously, they have an even bigger stake than us in the future. Um, in many ways, the tools that we use to analyze those kinds of questions are actually quite similar to the ones that we use for other sorts of questions. In the sense that how do you weigh up, trade off, or trade off, benefits and costs of undertaking an investment, of reducing forest cover, of delivering electricity to a village that has no power, but that might mean cutting down trees, or that might mean reducing natural resources. And so the tools we use are the same, but there are some aspects of grappling with sustainability that are very challenging. The long-term horizon, how do you make decisions over these generations or decades when the impact will only be felt so much further down the line? How do you price things that are so hard to price? How do you put a value on living in a world with less pollution, or on living with a world with less with less temperature increase and so on? So I think it's very, very difficult to get environmental economics right, but students care very passionately about this today, and so it's great that some of the brightest kids are studying this, and so hopefully we will get push this field further out in the years to come.
Mhm.
Okay, I have a related question to about all those bright kids who are studying economics. Now, traditionally, Indian students have preferred to focus on professional courses, like when we were growing up, engineering and medicine, for example. Now, economics seems to be very popular among a lot of students at your university and elsewhere, in fact. Are there going to be enough jobs for all these kids?
Yeah, another tough question. Um, I mean, I think the challenge with jobs is felt across multiple disciplines now. It's not just economics. Maybe medicine is an exception, because I think even now we have so few medical seats that we can still do with many, many more doctors than that we currently have for the size of this country. But even with engineers, a lot of engineers, young engineering students will struggle to find jobs. And so I think what is happening in the labor market is that if you go to a good institution or an elite institution, whether it's the private sector or in the public, one of our top public institutions, those students find it relatively easy to get jobs. And then you have all these other institutions, new one opening every day. I think students from these institutions, it's not clear what skills they're learning. Maybe they come in with, kind of, they haven't been to great schools. These are the students who are going to struggle to find jobs. I think for listeners of your podcast, I think what presumably these are students who are going to good schools. What they should think about is, how do you skill up? What are the kinds of skills that you can invest in that make you a kind of a better worker, that makes firms want to go out and get you? Because I know it in my limited personal experience of having to hire people for research teams, and I'm sure you have experienced similar when you've tried to hire young journalists. At the same time that you have a lot of unemployed young people and not enough jobs, you also have a real challenge trying to hire really good people for specific roles. And so you have this excess supply at one end, and then you have too much demand at the other end as well. And so there's this mismatch in the labor market. And I think bright students who are able to focus, work hard, learn skills, skill up as much as possible through college and maybe even through high school. I think their skills will continue to be in high demand. I don't think they'll have trouble getting jobs across any discipline, certainly not economics.
So, just a quick follow up on behalf of all those students who want to study economics abroad, like you
Yeah.
did. Is the teaching and the learning of economics very different in, say, the United States and the UK compared to India?
It used to be. I think when I did economics in St. Stephen's College, and I think it was in fact the year after I graduated, or maybe the year after I joined, that DU totally revolutionized well, I shouldn't say revolutionized, or upgraded the syllabus to be more in line with what is taught in the US. And I think that has only been improving as we go on. So again, it depends on which university you go to. What I studied was, economics undergrad syllabus from the 70s. And what students, even at DU and certainly at Ashoka and many other places, I'm sure, study now at the undergraduate level is much more aligned with what's taught in the US. So again, I think the school matters, which college you go to matters. Some colleges have, and some universities have changed their syllabus to reflect what is, modern economics pedagogy, and some have not. I think that's true again at the graduate level. So some places in India have done that. I think they've designed master's programs with that in mind. What is the frontier of research? What is the frontier of skills that are demanded in the corporate sector and so on? And they're teaching to that, but not all places are. And so I think it's useful for students to find out, the place that they're applying to, what is being taught there, what is the experience of students there, is it in line with what is considered modern economics pedagogy today? And I think that asking that question will be very useful.
Sure.
Anisha, one of the things that is changing every field is AI. And I'm sure with economics too, there is a huge impact, especially with large data sets. AI is probably a big boon. I want to relate it to the question that you talked about, the answer you gave earlier to what kinds of attributes, and you mentioned that they have to be comfortable with data and analyzing data. Can you talk a little bit of the impact of AI on economics, and what does it mean for the students? Now will AI take care of all of the data processing and they don't need to do it and they need to focus more on the interpretations? What does it mean for the students?
So I mean, just speaking personally, I haven't seen maybe I haven't found an AI system. I don't know anybody who's found an AI system which has completely taken over data analysis work. I think it's very good at taking over grunt work. And so, I definitely take help from LLMs in coding, for example, but I use it for, stuff that would be painful for me to write, 100 lines of code for, and then I can just get, kind of ChatGPT or whoever to generate that line, those lines of code very rapidly for me. So it speeds up the grunt work, but I can't tell ChatGPT, hey, tell me what the impact is of increasing use of AI on wages of students graduating college in 10 years. It won't be able to do it. It won't even know where to start. So I don't think data analysis is being outsourced. I think to some extent, look, software program, we've been using software to do data analysis for 50 years. And so that is continuing, right? But actually getting AI to take over the task of asking the questions, even finding the right data, writing all of the code required to ask that data, writing down the model, which you're going to fit the data to. I don't think it does that yet. So maybe that will change soon. But for now, it's really good at automating very tedious work, and making that go much faster and helping you be a more productive thinker.
So it automates work. It probably helps you get things done faster, but the critical thinking is still the most important thing that
Absolutely.
students need to develop, like in many other
Absolutely.
fields.
Absolutely. There's no outsourcing that. And here I should really make a pitch that look, that critical thinking is not going to come by getting ChatGPT to write summaries for you, or generate chunks of text for you. I think you've got to really grapple with those harder questions yourself. And ChatGPT it can be an aid in that. You can ask it to fetch some literature, you can ask it to, like I said, do grunt work for you, but it's not going to replace critical thinking just yet. And so I think students who are able to think independently, I think those are the ones who will, going back to your previous question, I think those are the ones who will still be very, very valued in a market where all firms are making use of AI.
So one area you've studied closely is gender gaps. So how important is it for more women to study economics, and why?
Yeah, this is a question quite close to my heart. Economics does really badly globally, at least, in terms of getting women enrolled. I think India is a little bit better. Um, but we are better only because, in India, girls tend to do better than boys in class 12 exams or school leaving exams. And so they're just more likely to get onto economics programs. But anywhere where they kind of have a choice of major, like at Ashoka or like at US universities, you find that women just kind of drop out of econ programs. Even when enrollments in physics and math are going up, female enrollments in physics and math are going up, they're actually flat or declining in economics. So that's something that we are obviously not doing well at all. Why should we matter? Why should this matter? Why should we care about it? I mean, I think ultimately, um, it's a pipeline issue. We want more senior women administrators at universities, for example. We want more senior women faculty. Why? Because we want them to, they end up asking questions that maybe, male economists care about less, right? Or they end up looking at issues that maybe, the average male economist is just less likely to study. We want more female policymakers at high levels, right? Why? Again, they may understand the preferences of half the population better than male policymakers. We want more women in top positions in firms. Again, if you're a corporate and your clients include women, that's something that you probably want to care about from a business perspective. But all of that depends on having women entering the entire pipeline. Whether it's a PhD or an MBA or some other graduate program or the undergraduate program. And so it's important for us to have more female students, or at least, increasing trend in female students in economics, I think. Like I said, we've not done a good job of this, but I hope that this can change going forward. Certainly, I know that many universities and companies are trying to improve their gender outcomes, and let's hope that this pays off, a few years down the line.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I have a related question, more the socioeconomic side, right? The family has traditionally been the sort of core economic unit. Increasingly, this kind of social structure is changing. A lot of single people, we're seeing aging populations, and in traditional families, the labor of women has never been considered when you're talking about the country's GDP. All of that is changing. So, for a student entering college today, and this is not necessarily studying economics, but thinking about it economically, how should they think about their economic lives?
I wish I knew the answers to all of this as well. Interestingly, they do these research projects. Many researchers look at how well people think in terms of their economic lives. Are they rational decision makers? How do they make decisions about saving, investment, optimization, and so on? And usually the people who populate these experiments are undergrad students or faculty members or something. You just drag them off their campus, wherever they are. You put them in these experimental labs and you run tests on them to see how they think. Unfortunately, everybody does really badly on this, right? Whether you've got an economics degree or not, whether you've got a PhD or not, I think our decisions are kind of riddled with biases at the best of times. That's why we study behavioral economics. But that said, let me attempt an answer. I think it's true that students are now probably less likely to be living in a single family unit or to be living with their parents. I think they're less likely to be married at the same age that, say, their parents were, and maybe less likely to have children as well. And so I think, obviously this changes how you think about long-term savings and long-term investments and long-term decisions, migration decisions, for example, about where you want to live, where you want to move to, and so on. I don't know which 16 to 18-year-olds out there are really thinking seriously about all of these questions. But I will say this, I mean, the other big change that is taking place that is also related to their economic lives, maybe less related to the family unit, is the fact that while all of this is also going on, the nature of work is also changing. The gone are the days when you joined one company and stayed there for 20 years or whatever it is. I think students move in and out. Oh, I shouldn't say students, I should say people, workers move in and out of companies quite rapidly. I think there's a lot more churn, there's a lot more flexibility, maybe a little bit more precariousness and more uncertainty. And so that's another kind of factor that students need to think about. How do they make decisions under uncertainty? And look, the core decision that most young people are making today is, what should I study? Where should I study? Should I, move for college? Should I move for a master's degree? And so these decisions should take into account, I guess, to some extent, all of these other questions. And so even if you can't think about how do I save for my kids' college investment fund or whatever it is, maybe you can think about quite seriously about, well, what are the skills that I should be trying to, invest in today that can help me get a job, but also give me skills that are transferable across different kinds of jobs. And basically, kind of I can hold on to in a period of higher uncertainty than my parents, for example, may have faced. So I would say focus on those immediate decisions. They're serious decisions and they're important decisions to make. these human capital investment decisions. And I think if students can think hard about those, I think that'll be a lot of the battle won with the later issues as well relating to our economic lives.
Yeah. I'd like to close with one question, which I'm assuming that youngsters would be interested in. What's the coolest thing about the work you do?
Okay, so for me personally, because I work in development and because I do a lot of primary data collection now, is that my work relates very much to the real lives of people, of companies, of of investors that you see around you, and that is really great to see. You can see the policy making in action when you read the newspapers, and then when you go back and you kind of open up your laptop and you're looking at a data set, it's speaking very closely to exactly what's happening right then and there. So I think the immediacy of what I do, the fact that it connects to important questions that are being asked today, and the fact that it relates to kind of real life people is one of the things that makes my work very cool.
Thank you, Anisha.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you for having me here. This was a very exciting conversation. I think hard questions, but I enjoyed answering them.
Thank you.
Thanks,
See you
Anisha.
then. Bye.
In today's decision-making segment, we're going to talk about a cognitive bias called anchoring bias. Anchoring bias happens when you have a piece of information and any subsequent information you get after it, you start evaluating on the basis of the original information. So let's say, for example, you're walking past a store and you've seen a shirt you really like, which cost about 1,000 rupees. A few days later, you pass by and you see that it's on sale and it costs 800 rupees. So you think to yourself, this must be a good deal because it's less than 1,000, because you've anchored yourself on the 1,000 rupees. So similarly, if you're, for example, seeing that many of your classmates who got high marks are opting for STEM subjects, you might start associating academic achievement and STEM. So even if you want to do art or drama or economics, you might opt for STEM simply because you associate that with achievement. So it's a good idea to be aware of what anchoring biases are in your mind and how you can avoid them while making decisions. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll be back with another one soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.